Welcome back to another lesson of the Logos and Letters. My name is Liam, and we're just going to have a very brief lesson here. I always think of that line from that Lot says in Genesis. I'm not going to give it away, but you know what it is. Every time I go to say I'm going to do a little lesson, I don't know why that line from Lot is probably the most memorable line for me in the Bible. And there are some very, very memorable lines in the Bible, but for some reason that line from Lot and just the rhetorical tool that he uses there is just so magnificent. It is so out of place. It's so unnecessary. It's so real. It is so real. It's like you're there listening to him. I don't know. It's, chef's kiss. It is amazing. But let's continue on. That was such a tangent. So antikaistai, so being in a state of opposition, so being in a state of being opposed, anti, like contrary, like in the against, kaistai, being positioned, being established. So antikaistai dekai tautado dokai. So these things seem to be, or appear to be, opposed, in a state of opposition. To estareistai, right? So the being in a state of privation, kai toten hexinachain, and the having of a hexis, hosteresis, just as hosteresis kai hexis, right? And so privation and hexis. So what he means by that, by this last line here, just in case that's confusing for any, the state of being in a privation and the state of having a hexis is contrary, opposed. It's in a state of opposition. I only meant contrary as in contrary positions. Anyway, and it's the same thing for the actual abstraction as well. Remember we were speaking about the concrete and the abstraction. It's opposed in the same way for both, okay, for the abstraction and for the concrete. Hogar tropos deus antithesios huautos, right? And the way of the contrary positions, right? The way that they're opposed one to the other, the way that they sort of face off against each other is the same. Hogar for Hoskar he tuflotestai opsai antikaitai, right? The blindness is opposed to the sight, okay? Wuto gar to tuflonainai doi opsinakain antikaitai, right? And so in this way, in this manner, the being blind is opposed to being with sight, okay, to the having of sight. So it is opposed, the toothless man, like the state of being toothless, to having teeth, right? That's opposed, and toothlessness is opposed to having teeth. All right. So long as we're speaking about the right subject here, okay. We've got to keep that in mind, but that's the little ribbon on this present of a lesson, this gift of a lesson. A lot of clarification to be done, but anyone who has now studied this stuff can walk into any Christian theological seminar, lecture, workshop, and perfectly communicate about privation. Understanding the difference between the abstraction and the concrete. The concrete is like this state of being, okay, this state of having the hexis, right? Ekain, right? Ekain, or state of being deprived, okay? Ainai, ainai, right? Tuflon ainai. Notice that. Isn't that an interesting way to finish off this lesson? How to notice that ainai, to be or being, it's an infinitive, it can be both, is used with the privatives or the deprivations, and the hexis is having, right? The hexis is having. Interesting way to consider it, that you have what you by nature were meant to have, and you are being in the privation, right? That is an interesting thought, and there's a lot to say about that. A lot of really high level stuff that could be said about that, especially the privation part and being in a state of privation, especially when you raise the topic of original sin. Okay, I do have an artwork, I think it's by William Blake, of Adam and Eve. Where is that? Being in a state of, oh no, this is Adam and Eve. Yeah, I think so. I don't know. Cain and Abel. No, yeah, this is Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel. So yeah, anyway, original sin, privation, and being in a state of that is a very, very interesting line of thought. Whereas having, right? What does that mean? What did they have? What did Adam and Eve have in the garden before the fall? And what state is someone being in for original sin? How do you explain this properly? Interesting. So anyway, we'll leave it there. It is a little one after all, right? And I'll leave that there. So thank you for listening as always. My name is Liam. Si semper fortis in opere, and I'll see you next time.